Welcome all Cormac McCarthy fans tuning in from around the world to another Book Vale Tudo event. And tonight we have our first bout of the Cormac McCarthy Vale Tudo. And we are pitting against each other two of Cormac McCarthy's absolute classics. One has to fall tonight. And I am so excited for this 8-book tournament. And the barn burner that is happening tonight is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian versus Cormac McCarthy's Suttree. However, at some point during the 7 rounds tonight, there is going to be a winner and loser. Our first fighter of the night is Suttree. First published in 1979 by McCarthy, Suttree is considered Cormac McCarthy's masterpiece. And I think Suttree is very comparable to Russia's Fedor Emelianenko. Both are very loyal to their homeland. McCarthy to Knoxville, or Suttree to Knoxville, and Fedor to Russia. Both run around with misfits. Fedor with the Russian mafiosos and Vladimir Putin. Suttree being all degenerates, hanging around Knoxville. However, both, as you see right now on the screen, have a violent streak. They have this goodness in their heart, but they are also violent at any moment. So I am excited to see what Suttree can do to its opponent, Blood Meridian, tonight in the fight. Our next fighter on the list is the boogeyman of Western literature, and that is Blood Meridian. You can't talk to any literature fan that's a male most of the time without having to hear about Blood Meridian at some point. And Blood Meridian isn't just a classic, it is violent. It is comparable to Vanderlei Silva's reign as we're watching right here. It is ferocious. It's about the Glantengain, a historical group of scalpers, robbers, pillagers, and and all the other negative things about life. And just like Vanderlei, it won't stop tonight until the job is done. It has so many, oh my God, it has so many beautiful and epic parts that I maybe can't see him losing to Suttree. So enough from me. Let's hop into the fight and get our face-off going. So our first category for the fight tonight is what novel has a better setting. And we aren't just going to be looking at what novel describes the setting better, but rather what novel embodies the setting better, what novel traces the forms of the natural world around it to create the characters and the plot, and maybe even at some level make the setting a character itself. So McCarthy is a master at this. We are talking about this in my Cormac McCarthy course actually right now in one of the sub-courses titled German Idealism, Nature, and Cormac McCarthy. Go check out the Cormac McCarthy course, link down in the description below if you are interested. But McCarthy has this dualistic relationship with nature, one being his more scientific, biological, analytical perception of nature, then the other being more of the mythos and archetypal symbolic looks that come up in his work with nature all of the time. And so on a pure descriptive level, I feel like Blood Meridian is much better. Some of the descriptions of the Sonoran Desert, the New Mexican Desert, the Chihuahuan Desert are some of the greatest nature passages of all time. However, the characters in Blood Meridian don't necessarily have as deep of a connection to nature as Cornelius Suttree does. Suttree in Knoxville is living out on a houseboat on the Tennessee River as we see here on the screen. And the river could be seen for many symbolic purposes as it usually is. For healing, the trout has been known throughout history as a healer or a healing symbol. And the natural world seems to have a very definite purpose in the novel. But in Blood Meridian, the characters do deal with nature, but sometimes it feels more superficial. For instance, it's more of man versus nature at some point, when the kid is stuck out in the desert without water. Near the end of the novel, some of the natural elements and scenery does play a big part in Blood Meridian. So now we have to kind of weigh out the two. The descriptions are way better in Blood Meridian, but I feel like there's a little bit more symbolic power in Suttree. However, only one is, in my opinion, one of the greatest achievements of setting in literary history. And that is the winner of this round, Blood Meridian, everybody. As someone who has lived in the Southwest for all of my life, no one has captured the essence like McCarthy in a fictional format. There have been a lot of nonfiction books about the Southwest that have been phenomenal, but I feel like McCarthy is one of the leaders in that field. However, I have read a lot of books where nature is a healing component or plays an integral role in a symbolic way like it does in Suttree. Even though McCarthy does do a beautiful job at describing southern settings and southern light, Southern Life. It's not something that has been done before, and I have found some Southern authors that I feel like are just as good at McCarthy as in describing the South. So it is 1-0 Meridian. So the next category on our list is characterization. And this one may seem a lot easier because there have been a lot of complaints about the characterization in Blood Meridian. People say that the kid really doesn't experience that big of a character arc change, maybe a little bit at the end. And Judge Holden is actually the one that is driving the characterization of the novel when it even happens. And then when we contrast that to Suttree, it is a very character-driven novel. There is very little plot, but we get a very wide cast of characters. We obviously have Suttree and Harrogate tripping in the dew, all the random side quests that happen. However, it has also been argued that there hasn't been that much character evolution in Suttree. Is Suttree really that different of a guy at the end of the novel than he was at the start of the novel? I think one could argue that he's falling into that classic routine where you think if you leave your city, all your problems are going to go away, but when you end up in a new city, all the same problems manifest again. However, this is a very clear win for Suttree. Some of the characters in Suttree are some of the most dynamic and fun that I've ever read in literature, just because they are so realistic to at least what I think would be going on in Knoxville in the early 1950s. So next is maybe the hardest one to pick out of all these, and this is where I really want some help from you guys, and that is plot. What novel has the best plot? And you could honestly argue that these novels don't really have very defined plots. Like All the Pretty Horses, John Grady, and Blevins. There's always a mission that is going on. They're going somewhere. Something is happening. But in Blood Meridian and Suttree, there are these like very light quests. Okay, in Blood Meridian, I need to survive. We're scalping people. We're now pillaging and looting a town. I'm trying to escape from this judge. You've taken over a river. In Suttree, I'm fit. I need to make some money on the river. I'm going up with this family and banging the young daughter of the guy I'm working with. Like there are these kind of loose plot points. And I also feel very weird doing this because I'm 100% sure that Cormac McCarthy, when he's sitting down and working on Blood Meridian and these novels for years, isn't saying, and we know this through the archive, he isn't saying, what's the plot of this? I mean, he's thinking about it, but he's not one, I need this arc. We need the rising action and then the climax. Like he's not thinking of it like that. So even though we are talking about plot, I don't want us to think about it in such a linear manner. So I want to recruit Peter Brooks in his book, Reading for the Plot, Design and Intention in Narratives and Narrative. And this is one of the best this is one of my favorite introductory, and it's even it's an advanced book, but for like literary criticism in general. And so Brooks writes, says, plot is, first of all, a constant of all written and oral narrative. Plot is the principle of interconnectedness and intention, which we cannot do without in moving through the discrete elements, incidents, episodes, action of a narrative. He also says, plot as it interests me is not a matter of typology or fixed structures, but rather a structuring operation peculiar to those messages that are developed through temporal succession and the instrumental logic of a specific mode of human understanding. So when we examine the logic of the narrative of the narrative discourse that both books are doing, I think that there is a little bit more systematic and magical element to Suttree, because the end of Blood Meridian is epic. I mean, that is a climax. I mean, we move towards something and it is beautiful. But everything before that, I mean, we get a little bit of the plot and characterization, you could say, with the kid and his journey to joining, the scalping gang, meeting the hermit and all of that. But all of it doesn't really seem interconnected, other than that it's just a chain of violence toward a very symbolic and apocalyptic end. However, Suttree seems to have subtle building with an emotional layering, much more italicized and symbolic chapters that are fueled by sort of this dualistic nature of Suttree. We see at times Suttree just outright weeping when the weight of, the trauma and the experiences surrounding him become too great. And we also see very classical plot elements, even though there aren't really, two guys in prison. One tries to make an escape, prison fights, a lot of McCarthy-esque things happening. And having reread both novels in succession a couple weeks ago, with this idea of plot in my mind, understanding I'd be doing this breakdown, Suttree squeaks this one out and is now ahead 2-1 in our Vale Tudo fight. Suttree seems to have this very mystical power to it that I think is because McCarthy spent so much time, obviously growing up in Tennessee and reminiscing and writing about it, that this was his masterpiece. But if you also don't know, he moved to El Paso in 1974 and worked to jumpstart his writing of Suttree. So there are desert inspirations within Suttree. Most of Suttree, you could say, was finalized in the desert, even though he had basically the whole book done for 10 years prior to that point. All the major revisions were happening at that time. So next on our list is style. What has the better writing style, language? And I think if we just looked at it from a very literary sense or like an artistic sense, Suttree has much more eloquent prose, like in the sense of classical literature. Like, for instance, even just like the prologue and some of the descriptions, it feels very old. However, I don't think that should fool us, because Blood Meridian takes place in an entirely different world. Europe and the East Coast, Tennessee, the South, have a deep connection in the sense that there really aren't any deserts there until you hit the Middle East and parts of Eastern Europe. However, the American Southwest is a fairly new place in literature. Even though we have been living in the Southwest for a while, a lot of places in the Southwest really haven't started to become more populated until the last 100 or so years, when infrastructure and technology have gotten much better. So the eco-literature and criticism of this area is very new, but what McCarthy does in Blood Meridian is akin to a Sand County Almanac, Desert Solitaire, some of the desert Southwestern classics. And even more so, outside of the eco side, the descriptions of violence, these things we don't, unless I guess you're into horror or historical war novels, these things don't come up very often for, once again, a classical reader. When I'm looking at my fiction shelf over here, most books have violence, but it's not contemplating and living with the violence. That has, I think, become a bit, obviously anything now exists in genre fiction, but McCarthy, who was born in 1933, has a very classical style and literature, and him approaching violence from a Southwestern twist. And the descriptions in Blood Meridian are mind-blowing, are one of a kind. And I think the style, much like I said earlier about the setting, has been unmatched in that context. I would argue that the style of Suttree has also been unmatched. But I think for American literature in general and for modern consciousness, the desert is a very special place, as McCarthy talks about in the quotes in Blood Meridian. At the start of the book in Blood Meridian. And so this may be a controversial pick, but I am going to pick Blood Meridian for having a better style. I also may be biased because I have another video on the channel that talks about how I wrote Blood Meridian by hand. And I read in a book today, a productivity book, about some novelists making fun of that practice. But then after that, he says that Hunter S. Thompson and all these other famous authors have done it. But I see that as a waste of time. Why not just write a novel? And I was like, that's why you are not Hunter S. Thompson. Because living in the time paradigm and worrying about time management and all that doesn't create good writers. Good writers are living a life and care about writing, and most of the time, not few other things. They live a very interesting and laid-back life, and they aren't too ambitious in other aspects of life. They may be social, they may be addicts, but they're not punching their timer and setting 20 minutes and doing Podoro reps to make sure that they can finish their word count for the day. All right, so we are at 2-2 right now. I mean, this is really close. I didn't know who was going to win. I thought this may become a runaway, and I'm really not trying to be as objective as I can about this for the fight. So the next category on our list is the vibe, and this may seem a little woo to some of you guys out here, but there is a certain feeling when you get a book. There is an intuitive part of reading. And when you read something, the general reaction that you have is most important. So I told you guys a couple weeks ago, I reread Suttree and Blood Meridian. I've honestly been rereading all of Cormac McCarthy's books in succession for like 6 months now because I'm, doing this in the Cormac McCarthy course. And man, something hit me with Suttree. Like I feel like I need to cry right now. There was something so nostalgic and so beautiful about Suttree, and like just seeing green. I'm just seeing green and blue energy, and like just so much expansiveness and like depth and untold things that I'll probably never experience. And it was beautiful. And when I read Blood Meridian, I sat there and I was contemplating the questions of reality and violence and God and evil and like all these different things and like having little mini existential crises. But there's only so much down that path. There's only so much down that path of violence and the evil of humanity. I mean, you know, you could spend your whole life contemplating that, and that's beautiful. But I feel like McCarthy tapped into something so unique in Suttree. You know, when you think of Blood Meridian, there's, like you see in like a lot of the covers for the novels, there's a lot of black and red, and it's got this dark feeling to it. But Suttree isn't just some like purity, light, angelic novel, but it feels almost very Lord of the Ringsy. It feels like there's like a lore and a magic to it, even though the only kind of magical things that happen are maybe kind of the solo mountain quest and then kind of the fever dream hallucinations at the end. However, the vibe is there for Suttree. So I'm going to give it this round for the vibe. We are at 3-2 right now for Suttree. We have 2 rounds left. Suttree could finish us and knock out Blood Meridian right now. We don't even need to go to a round 7. First time in Right Conscious history that we may have a knockout blow. So the next section is the symbolic writing. And this one is actually wild because when I first thought of this, and I'm trying to come up with a very objective system. I've done a couple of these other ones on different authors, and I've tried different lists, and I'm trying to come up with a permanent list so that I can face off all the books together and have like a very static list. So once again, if you guys want to make any recommendations on the list, let me know, because that would be great. So when I was thinking of symbology, though, I was like, oh, Suttree all the way. But then for whatever reason, I was like, oh, wait, how could I ever forget the last, 40 pages of Blood Meridian? How can I forget that there's basically like a bunch of archons running around together, and there's all this weird archetypal symbolic energy. And now that I know about the kid and the passenger and the kid now and the judge and the horts and like all this different stuff going on, it's wild, right? So some of the things that are missing from Blood Meridian there are some dream symbols. There are like, there's storytelling, and all the stuff from the judge is actually very symbolic. But then we have some of the more subtle and like italicized sections of Suttree, some of the more nuanced symbols in Suttree. However, Blood Meridian has done something with symbology and archetypes, even though I'll be releasing this video soon, Cormac McCarthy and Carl Jung. McCarthy doesn't like Carl Jung and take some shots at him in Stella Maris. I think that he really wrote a very Jungian book. And maybe, we could obviously look deeply at Suttree and probably pull out the Jungian mandala and find everyone on there too. But making symbols the living reality of a book, manifesting them into a historical gang out in the middle of the desert is wild, and I think deserves a round. I think that Blood Meridian is going to need to win on the symbolic level. So we have now rounded it out 3-3. We are all tied up going into the last round, and our last one, and this may be a controversial pick of putting this last, is the legacy. What is the legacy? What will the legacy be of these books? Will they make the American canon? And if we think of someone like Harold Bloom, people love Harold Bloom. He says that Suttree is great novel, but that Blood Meridian is much better and deserves to be in the American canon. And it's wild to say this, but I think I agree. Even though I want, guys, I feel like I need to cry again. Even though I want Suttree to be, read by everyone, it's not as accessible as some people probably need it to be. I want people to be smart and to read all the books that I want to read. But a lot of us here maybe got here because someone said, yo, you got to read this Blood Meridian book. A lot less of us started with someone saying, yo, you got to read this book, Suttree, bro. So I think we have a decision at the end of the fight. There was no knockout tonight because the fight didn't end early. There was no submission or knockout tonight. But the winner by split decision, 4-3, is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Let's go, everybody. The Cormac McCarthy Vale Tudo is going to continue, however. And if you want to watch a guide on Nietzsche and Blood Meridian, that video is right over here. Peace.